Good evening. It is wonderful to be here in Barcelona. From the point of view of the Academy, we are thrilled with what the group here at the Hub is doing. You are fulfilling so many of the things that we declare, in theory, and we can't do ourselves because we're so scattered. I thought in 5 minutes I would try to give you a little picture of the Academy, what we're up to, and how we came to be. So, if this thing works, yes, okay. The background is that after World War II, there was plenty of money for research on science and technology, but by the 60s and 70s, it was dwindling. And many European scientists felt that if they wanted to meet each other, they would probably meet in America rather than in Europe. So, but the Council of Europe at the same time was encouraging international cooperation. So in 1974, the European Science Foundation was created. And they were, in fact, our parents. But they consisted of representatives of countries and institutions. And it wasn't an academy of individuals. But it was considered to be a daring adventure, because there was nothing else of a Europe-wide body at the time. Now, since 1988, since 74, many bodies have arisen, and so the same rationale does not exist. The person to whom we owe the greatest gratitude, I think, is Monsieur Hubert Curien, who was Minister of Research in France, and he assembled the foreign ministers of various European countries to Paris in 1984. And at that meeting, there was a British spokesman who said, what you need is an academy, a fellowship of European scientists, prestigious, self-regulating body which fulfills the function of a national academy, but on a European basis. And that's how it got launched. At several meetings later, it was decided that it would be consisting of individuals rather than representatives of institutions, that it would be the top scientists of Europe, that the definition of science would be Wissenschaft, not the narrow British definition of science as physical science, and so on. Then in 1988 we were launched, so it's a young academy. Now this picture shows some ladies in front, but don't let those long legs fool you. They are spouses of the men. It is almost 99% male. This is the first council, you see. We had several countries represented, but again, all male. I interviewed some of the founders, videotaped them, and they have been published in the European Review, which is one of the Academy's most important products. Our editor is here this evening, European Review. And there, I can say, in general, these men, the founders, they were predominantly from the physical sciences, but they had some appreciation of the humanities and social sciences. Most of them were highly regarded within their respective international scientific organizations. They all had experiences in different countries, and they all had experienced war, depression, boom and bust. So they understood the importance of having collaboration, and again, all male. Here were the countries, not at all evenly distributed, Germany and Britain being the most numerous, Sweden and France close second. And of the fields, physics and engineering, earth and cosmic sciences being dominant. These are our presidents. We have a new president who is eager to make new waves, and he's doing very well so far. And so I'll conclude with giving you a list of our mission statement, our goals, so that you can see, you can read them yourselves, you can see how tonight's event really fulfills a number of those goals. They all involve a dialogue of cultures, a confrontation face-to-face of different views. And it's significant for me to think of this being in Barcelona, in Spain, because I think the Disputatio really can be traced back to the Studium Generale of medieval times, where Christian, Jewish, and Arab could meet face-to-face and debate things. We are very much engaged in this dialogue of cultures, and it's heavily funded by Sweden, Riksbanken's Jubileum Fund, and I'm personally involved at the moment in a series of projects with Turkey and Europe So what you're doing this evening really delights our hearts, and thank you so much for doing it. Thank you. Bye.
Well, thank you. Thank you to all of you, especially President Sid Kledin is not able to come, and he apologizes for this. Thank you to Anne Buttimer, the Vice President, not all male, there's some women here. And thank you to David Coates, which is the soul of the academia, and perhaps the heart of this. Is always working and giving work to all of us. And thank you to Andrea Mascolelli, because he is the padre de la criatura here. When the Academia Europea has 20 years, 22 years, they decided to have some hubs in other places. And they put the first one in Oslo. Oslo is Breslau. Breslau is the place it was in the time that 19th until Second World War II was in a German city, and is the place where they gave the University of Breslau gift to Brahms the honorary doctorate, and he paid them with overture per una academic officer. So they gaudiamos igitur, we go to Brahms and to Breslau. After 1-2 years, they decided to put another one. And was discussion about this. So Barcelona won, thanks to Andrea. And we are the Mediterranean, and really we can do so. Just the only thing I can do is I am in charge. The first director was in Genoveva, which is here. And I was after her. I cannot do better than her because it was impossible to separate. But we are doing things. We have extraordinary young people, young ladies, working, and thanks also to the Fundación Catalana per la Recerca, and especially to the Institute for Catalan Studies. We are there, and we have all the organization. We are in the center of Barcelona, in the Raval, and it's a small place, but with a big heart to receive all your initiatives and all your questions. So consider that in Carmen 47, they are not only the Institute for Catalan Studies, but also the Barcelona Knowledge Hub of the Academia Europea. Thank you.
Good evening. I think I should join Dr. Guerrero in giving thanks to many, especially to Councillor Mascolelli and to his office and to the Generalitat of Catalunya. But allow me to begin first by greeting you and welcoming you all here. I am Parvati Nair, and I direct the United Nations University Institute here that is based here in São Paulo on globalization, culture, and mobility. Please allow me to welcome you on behalf of all our team here. UNU-GCM, as we are known, is a research institute of the United Nations University, which is itself an academic think tank of the UN system, of the United Nations system. And the UNU generally has a focus on issues related to development. Here at UNU-GCM, we specifically work on areas to do with culture and mobility. And of course, migration forms a central aspect of the work that we do. And located as we are here in Barcelona, we are particularly interested in the Mediterranean as an area of cultural encounters, of differences, of crossings, of borders. And we work as well within the United Nations University as the coordinating point of the United Nations University's migration network. And we are also, very recently, we joined the Global Migration Group, which is a group of 18 agencies of the United Nations working on migration globally. So we have a lot of work to do. We are very young as an institute, but we feel very privileged to be here. We are particularly honored to be housed here in this magnificent São Paulo complex. Our own offices are in the San Manuel Pavilion, which is a splendid pavilion, and it is, of course, a great joy for me to be able, therefore, to welcome you here to this absolutely unique and splendid site, Art Nouveau site. And we particularly thank the Generalitat of Catalunya and the city of Barcelona that make it possible for us to be here. We are also particularly, we are an academic institution, and we are very, very, very happy and very, we feel very warm about connecting up with other academic institutions here in Barcelona. We are particularly honored to have this collaboration with the Barcelona Knowledge Hub of the Academy of Europe, because of course we also are interested in knowing and entering, forming networks beyond Barcelona within Europe, and so it's a great pleasure for us to have this opportunity to collaborate. And I would really like to thank both Dr. Genoveva Martí for, putting this proposal to us last year, and Dr. Guerrero for taking it through and making it possible for us to have this occasion. We are very aware that this is no ordinary academic event. We are aware that the Disputatio has a long history, but a very special history. This is, I believe, only the third time that it has been held in Barcelona, and we feel very honored to have a small part in this very historical milestone in the cultural and intellectual history of Catalonia. So thank you very much, and a warm welcome. Therefore, it's my privilege to welcome our speakers. And please may I begin by introducing the first of our speakers, who perhaps needs not much of an introduction because of course he's very well known, and he's Dr. Enric Banda. He pursued his doctoral studies at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, completing a PhD in physics in 1979 at the University of Barcelona. He then did a postdoc in Zurich at the ETH, and was research professor of the Spanish High Council of Scientific Research in 1987. He has gone on to do many more accomplishments. He was director of the Earth Sciences Institute in Barcelona in 1988, Secretary General of the National Research and Development Plan in 1994, Secretary of State for Universities and Research in 1995, Secretary General of the European Science Foundation in 1998 to 2003, He was director of the Catalan Foundation for Research and Innovation and of the Catalan Institution for Advanced Studies between 2004 and 2007. He was director of Innovation and Environment at La Seda de Barcelona, and since 2009 he has been director of Science and Environment at La Caixa Foundation. He has been the vice president of the European Geophysical Society, editor-in-chief of Technophysics, and European editor of Geophysical Research Letters. He's the author of more than 160 reviewed scientific papers, and of course a member of the Academy of Europe. He's a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and former president of Euroscience between 2006 and 2012. And since 2012, he has also been a member of the Real Academia de Ciencias y Artes de Barcelona. So it is, as you can see, a real privilege to welcome him, and thank you for offering us a glimpse of your work. Thank you.
Minister, does it work? Does it work? Yeah. It works? No, it doesn't work. Doesn't work, the sound? Well, maybe if I speak a little bit loud now, it'll help. Now? Oui. Okay, Minister, authorities, members of Academia Europea, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, I would like to start by thanking the organizers of the 2014 Disputatio
and therefore to the Academia Europea and, of course, the hub in Barcelona for inviting me to speak in front of such a distinguished audience. I would like also to say that I am glad that the Disputatio does not mean that I have to enter into a dispute with the other speaker, Professor Maria Paradiso, because I don't like to be a loser. So with the title Science as a Mediterranean Bridge, I chose to work on proposing science as a vital bridge between Mediterranean and European values. The Vice President of the Academia has shown us the mission and vision, and there it is clear that the Academia Europea defends European values. And therefore, that's why I chose to focus on this bridge between Mediterranean and European values. And I will try to convince you of that in about 20 to 25 minutes. In trying to achieve my objective, I will follow a very, very simple scheme. I will talk a little bit of, I will give you a taste of science, but I try not to bore you. I will talk about where are we today in scientific terms of the knowledge of the Mediterranean and the Mediterranean region, and then I will very quickly go into the human factor, the way that I see we have to go from science to society, and I will just mention responsible research, which is a value we also defend now at the European level. So the Mediterranean region, I don't need to tell you that it is a very complex region, multinational, rich or not so rich northern regions versus a poorer south. And you probably know, and it's obvious from the picture, that Mediterranean means in the middle of the land or between lands. And the Romans used to call it Mare Nostrum. So a little bit of science. As I have mentioned, I wanted to start by showing a few details of the geological evolution of the Mediterranean. In other words, let us see how different branches of earth sciences joined forces and were able to unveil some features of the evolution of the Mediterranean. In other words, let us see how we get from the Tethys to the Mediterranean. Now here you have Pangaea, about 200 million years ago, the supercontinent. At the time it was starting to break up. And what I will show is now a video that, if necessary, we can repeat, where we see the evolution, but we will pay, or I will try to pay some attention to the closing of this ocean and the extreme end here that will be the Mediterranean. So let's see if it works. Yes, it does. So this is the opening of the Atlantic here. I point to India here. We are 120 million years ago. The Atlantic is opening, keeps opening. India keeps going up. And very soon India hits Eurasia, and the Himalayas are formed, and the whole of the alpine chain is formed, and eventually we have the Pleistocene glaciation and back to the situation of today. So some of you may think that this is not science, and I would claim that perhaps it is not science, but it is based on science. If we would have to enter into details of everything that I have shown, then it would take us several disputatios. But in principle, as you know, plate tectonics was consolidated as a theory in the 60s and 70s, and we have been progressing quite a bit in the understanding of the evolution. And that's how the Mediterranean started as a big thetis, and it closed with the collision of India and the collision of Africa and Eurasia to form the Alpine chain. So now, the main reason why I thought I will show you another video now, which is in the same vein, is also a simulation, but it's again based on data from geology, geophysics, and all other earth sciences. This is a video, the author is Stephen Ward from Santa Cruz in the University of California, that will show how was it that the Mediterranean closed at about 6 million years ago. It just closed. And as a consequence of this, it dried up, nearly dried up. This is known as the Messinian salinity crisis. Then comes the subsequent filling up of the Mediterranean, and this is how the planet on its own has tailored the Mediterranean region. I will mostly be silent in this one because it's explained in the video. This is the plate movement that makes the Eurasian plate and African plate to collide in such a way that the Mediterranean gets isolated. And it dries. It dries, 75% of the Mediterranean dried up. But water came back to the Mediterranean through the Strait of Gibraltar, and you see it here. You see the filling up of the Mediterranean. You can see it from different perspectives in the computer simulation. You see Corsica and Sardinia still together. Well, again, this is a video that shows some of the things that science is able to do with the past geological records and geophysical studies, and therefore you may or may not believe 100% of it. But actually, some of the authors of part of this work are from the Earth Science Institute here in Barcelona, and I see the director there and one of the authors of one of the papers that dealt with this issue. So if there was to be a scientific debate, we could have it. Well, now let me go back to the slide saying, why science? I mean, the main reason why I thought I should start with science is simply because science was born in the Mediterranean region. Without looking down at contributions from other regions or cultures such as China, Islam, and many others that I will not mention here. And I could have taken a different discipline, but I come from earth sciences, and I hope that you will be indulgent with my choice. Now, Mediterranean, go back to the Mediterranean. These are, commercial routes, and internal and external, in the time of the Greeks and the Romans in the Mediterranean. And actually, it was the tremendous mobility of Mediterranean civilizations with their exchange of ideas through commerce and traveling that propitiated the consideration that nature could be understood in itself and not merely by listening to gods. But this is not only because of commerce, and it's also because at the same time, especially in the 6th century before Christ, philosophy was established. Philosophy is a Greek name that means love of wisdom. And around, as I said, the 6th before Christ, there was this questioning of things, saying we don't have to believe what the myths tell us. I mean, we have to think on our own and discover why things as they are. And that was the initial phases of philosophy, which then diverted into science, and until today. I mean, that's very much in the same way that democracy was born in the Mediterranean as a new political system. Now, the Mediterranean approach towards knowledge can also be interpreted as the initial steps towards European values. Intellectual challenges and progress have been fundamental in the history of humanity and has shown us the way to the generation of knowledge and its democratization. Of course, I could have mentioned when I was preparing this, many names came to my mind. I could have started with Thales of Miletus, of course, one of the founding fathers of science, if you want to put it that way. Or we could have talked about Democritus, who is very well known for his atomic model, atomic theory. But I just wanted to pay a tribute to those that initiated science as we know it today. But before getting to science as we know it today, history went through, at least in our region, a fairly obscure part, which is the medieval area, the medieval ages, and it was not until the Italian Renaissance, the rebirth. I mean, that was like a reset, you know, in a computer in the 15th century, from artistic, from cultural, and also from scientific viewpoint. And the latter, the scientific viewpoint, led us to science as we know it today. So I consider altogether that the Renaissance is also a bridge between the medieval and modern ages. As an anecdote, since I have had to be reading a little bit to prepare for this Disputatio, as an anecdote, I learned that in the Greek mythology, Europe was a Phoenician princess of whom Zeus felt in love. Well, Zeus felt in love with many, but this is, I mean, she was one of them. And this was followed by a number of tales of interesting names. One is the rape of Europe. Another one is the abduction of Europe. Another one is the seduction of Europe. And this could give a lot of breadth from political viewpoint, but I will pass from it today. However, I would not like to give a simplistic or naive view of how progress is achieved. Progress is never easy. And from Greek time, take Socrates, who, among others, were accused and condemned for things such as lack of respect for the gods or for supposedly corrupting their followers. In summary, I started with a little detail on the science of the geological evolution of the Mediterranean as we know it today, to suggest science as a strong and nuclear bridge between Mediterranean and European values. Values that, as I have said, that are present in the mission and objectives of Academia Europea. So where are we today? Let me now jump to the present day. Today, the Mediterranean is a hot spot for the biodiversity because it has extraordinary biodiversity, but it's also the region on Earth that it has more species threatened of extinction. It is a hot spot for climate change. It is a hot spot for invading species, for instance. It's a small-scale laboratory. With that in mind, research has also accumulated quite some knowledge about the present-day state of the Mediterranean. and I will restrict myself to water for just a couple of minutes. For instance, look at the water flow in the Mediterranean. Italy, Sicily, Corsica and Sardinia, and this is a real movement of the water circulation in the Mediterranean. We know it in the Mediterranean, and we know it in practically all oceans, but I find it particularly beautiful to look at this movement of water flow, knowing that the rivers that go into the Mediterranean do not have enough water to fill the Mediterranean, and the answer to that is in the Strait of Gibraltar, which is the main source of water into the Mediterranean. Look at the beautiful 3 Alboran Sea cells. Well, this is just to give you an example, but I will give you, well, the Gulf of Cadiz is also quite busy. A few examples. I could show you several. I could show you the salinity map. We have data for showing physical properties of the Mediterranean Sea in any aspect that you wish. For instance, this is a salinity map where red is more salty and red is more salty, blue is less salty. Or we could also look at the sea surface temperature. We have sea surface temperature in real time. I mean, this is 2 pictures, one from, I'm sorry. One is from August 2014. The other one is from October, and you see the map of temperatures, with red, hot, and blue in colder temperatures. These are only examples, or look at this marvelous picture from satellite where we can see the dust from the Sahara. There's that rains here in Barcelona from once in a while. We can see it, we can detect it, in real time, all the time, with satellite techniques. So everything I have said, the accumulated data, by the way, talking about the Mediterranean, since I work for La Caixa Foundation, I will not hide you that there is a very nice exhibition on the Mediterranean, different aspects, cultural and scientific, of the Mediterranean at the Science Museum a few kilometers from here, and maybe some of you will be there in the next few days. Now, I was saying that the accumulated data, which I have shown through a few maps, point to an extraordinary sea that piles a large number of serious problems. I've listed here a few. Pollution. Well, we could talk for hours about the pollution in the Mediterranean area, in the Mediterranean Sea in that case. Climate change with associated rising sea level, another problem we are facing. Higher frequency of extreme weather events, most probably linked with climate change, most probably. Tourism in itself is not a problem, but it may be a problem if it is not regulated in an orderly way. Loss of biodiversity, this is a threat that the Mediterranean region has. Geological and natural hazards. In the past, we have had very strong volcanic eruptions that could come any time. When there's been one, there may be another one. Concentration of population, which is also an interesting subject. So there's a number of problems that science identifies, but it turns out that science is the only way to fix them. So science identifies the problems, and science is the only way to solve them. Therefore, science was conceptually initiated by early Mediterranean cultures, has to be the platform that will allow the Mediterranean to be sustained and sustainable. Now we move to the human factor, which is very short. I have shown you before how the salinity crisis happened without any intervention of the humans who were not there. But the problems I have listed in the slide before are most of them due to the human action. Human action is the one that has provoked some of the problems, and therefore we have to fix it. Now let me have a look forward. But to look forward, to think about the future, I will again bring you back in time by reminding you of the debate of the two cultures initiated by C.P. Snow in 1959, or the concept of the third culture as suggested by Brueggemann. The debate, in essence, deals with the need for a closer approach between the scientific and the humanistic views. I will not really dwell on that, but I will show you a picture that I'm in love with that picture. I show it whenever I can, which is the Athens School by Raphael. Since we talk about the Renaissance, I show you this, where he, in a visionary way, put together philosophers, scientists. I mean, you could identify here Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, Hypatia, the mathematician is here, Democritus, Ptolemy, a number of them. And he already, you know, in 1509, put together this, and this is a signal of how much we still today need the agora. So we only with shared scientific and humanistic knowledge will be able to progress towards a really integrated view, a multi-angle view as a basis to find solutions. So I'm about to finish, but before that, two more messages. One, we have to get science to society. Now, I will end by insisting once more that science, the bridge that has more often than not been ahead of economic and political action, as you know. Well, some of us my age know the context with the Soviet Union at the time and how we collaborated with them independently of the Cold War and things like this, with all the difficulties, of course. And I consider sustainability of the Mediterranean as one of the challenges of the region. But science requires research. But what sort of research do we need? Above all, research needs to be responsible, as I have said in the beginning. This is a way to say that research has to be a joint effort from all. And when I say all means not only scientific and humanistic. It means, and I think it's extremely important to underline, it means society at large. This, in turn, will allow research to focus in our problems. So the concept of responsible research and innovation that I will not get into, but basically I will say that it means that it has, the science or research in this case, has to be anticipatory. I mean, it has to have anticipation. It has to be inclusive. It has to be reflective. It has to be responsive. And of course, all of this, it has to be around the pillars of what responsible research is, which is the policies of, say, governance, good governance, design science for and with society, open access, share results to advance, ethics, do the right thing and do it right, science education, creative learning, fresh ideas, and gender equality, unlock the full potential and not only 60% of the potential, and engagement, which is public participation in the processes. So I can identify several scenarios where responsible research is a must. The set of countries on the north and south shores of the Mediterranean, their history, their talent and values constitute one of my preferred scenarios for responsible research. We should be able to do it, and I am confident that we shall. Thank you.
My thanks to Dr. Banda for this fascinating lecture, which really makes me want to to learn much more, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way about the sort of scientific and geophysical aspects of the Mediterranean, which in a way influence also the social and cultural aspects that we here at UNU-GCM work with so much. So thank you very much indeed. I'm very sure that many of you like me will have questions. May I just remind you that on your chairs, on your seats, you will find a card where you can write down questions for our two speakers, and there will be an opportunity after the two lectures to present your cards, and a selection will be made of the questions. So please do feel free to use your cards if you so wish. It is now my privilege and my honor to welcome Professor Maria Paradiso. Professor Paradiso is Professor of Geography at the University of Sanya in Italy. She's a member of the Academy of Europe and has been, since 2013, has been chair of the Italian National Committee in the International Geographical Union, and she's also chair of the International Geographical Union Commission with a particular focus on the Mediterranean Basin. She's also the primary coordinator of the 7th research framework within the Marie Curie-Euromed partnership, working on a project called MedChange, Euromed Changing Relationships. And today we have the pleasure of welcoming her here to listen to her speak to us about the Mediterranean, bridging, bordering, cross-bordering in a global mobile reality. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Parvati, and welcome to. It's really, I feel privileged to stay here and have the opportunity to talk with you. And thank you very much to this brilliant alliance between Accademia Europea and United Nations University. My assumption for today, despite the fact that I come from a real Mediterranean city, my assumption is there is no clear proof that Mediterranean is a bridge of cultures. However, and we are all actors of communities networking. So I would like to propose you just a path, and then maybe I will go shortly on some of my ideas, maybe try to finish earlier a little bit like also Enric did. The first question is that Mediterranean is full of borders. Europe itself is a bordering geographical reality within and outside. There are also other kind of borders which are not simply physical or economic and social, they are also intellectual. So maybe the second step we should take as responsibility, maybe also in terms of Accademia Europea, is releasing the Mediterranean from imprisonment. And then maybe we can look with more fresh ideas and more awareness about what's on really, what are the changes in the Mediterranean region. So basically, I look at the Mediterranean as a global mobile reality, not really separated or not really as a space of otherness or other space or residual or marginal space. I would like to start from maybe a paradoxical assumption that Mediterranean is a scientific invention, as we know from geography, because it is a scientific invention. It was invented relatively newly. However, and unfortunately, what this invention by the French school and the German traditional schools became obsolete. And so maybe we have to discuss about what is obsolete today, what is the role of academia in perpetuating regional myth, and what we can do beyond this regional myth, which are imprisonment. Of course, I will refer here briefly also to other kind of bordering realities and imprisonment, which can come from more social and political situations. But let's start with the idea of Mediterranean unitary, which is really a fiction. So why it is a fiction? Because it was based on the idea of a genre de vie, a kind of lifestyle which stemmed out from the way that people practices agriculture and all kinds of activities. But unfortunately, this has been changed, and this has been changed because a kind of modernization path took over, and Southern Europe, for instance, became even more and more indifferent from North Africa, for example. example, or the Middle East. So they're really something telling us that the idea became obsolete, the idea of unitary vision of the Mediterranean, or the Mediterranean as a unified reality. Another aspect which for me is problematic, and it has reminded by some literature, and I call it in a different way, I call it as a mirror metaphor. The mirror metaphor is that much of the popular culture we have about the Mediterranean has indeed accumulated through the paintings or the travelers of people, but what kind of people? They were normally people coming from Europe and Northern Europe. So much of the popular visions about the Mediterranean is a kind of cultural artifact and also a kind of stereotype. So I just guess and maybe dispute that there are a lot of stereotypes around, and they can imprison a little bit the idea of the Mediterranean. So the fiction of the unitary Mediterranean is a kind of mirror for Europeans. There is also another point that border a little bit this kind of region and create problems of communications among shores, is the fact that looking at the Mediterranean in this kind of unitary vision, sometimes with benevolence or sometimes with other attitudes in terms of policies, lay down on the idea that there are still in the Mediterranean a lot of permanences, a lot of things that they have been lasting over centuries and that they are still there. Probably not. So my idea maybe is a more balanced idea that we cannot think anymore to permanences in the Mediterranean, but maybe we can adopt a kind of attitude that we have to take care of legacies, but not really permanencies. And when I refer to legacies, for example, I refer to the idea of ethnicity and some kind of communitarian views, which of course influence a lot relationships among shores. So what I can tell you, it's basically the idea of the Mediterranean as a whole, unitary as a whole, and unitary fiction is something that put Mediterranean a little bit in a marginal position compared to other world region or to other region. Why also? Because our idea about Mediterranean as Europeans are sometimes really detached from what are the ideas and intellectual production from other shores. And much of the knowledge we have created in social sciences and humanities, I don't dare to dispute, of course, of your beautiful presentation, and you had really wonderful ideas in presenting videos. But what I would like to argue that in terms of social sciences, we forgot, but recently not anymore, that the Mediterranean also has a kind of geopolitical sensitivity, is a post-colonial sea. And this came problems. But it's not a kind of geopolitical sensitivities because post-colonial attitudes, Orientalist attitudes are also sometimes in everyday practices. So how we can refer to kind of harmonized and interesting cooperation among shores or relationships when you think that sometimes a kind of colonial imagination is still there, also when you approach tourism, when you approach flows, when you approach cruises, etc., etc. So there is a lot of intellectual traps we have created, and maybe we have to renovate in a certain way, but we are not really the guilty, because as we know, scholars normally don't provide bad problems to society, or at least at a certain measure they do. There is also another problem which stems out from the behavior of Europe and the European neighborhood policies, for example. What I wish to tell simply is that as normally scholars are aware that Europe is a construct, having a lot of ambiguities, and Europe is a kind of a bordered zone itself, as it is in a constant flux. It negotiates exclusions, it negotiates inclusion. So my, my question is, why scholars can be so sensible if they look at the European construct and European building, I mean, and they have the same sensibilities when we are talking about the Mediterranean, because I think the same kind of notions can be applied to Mediterranean also in terms of an intentional constructions and intentional territorialities, not just constructions which wish to prove that Mediterranean can be like a backward space of Europe. I want just to say that there are interesting evolutions, of course, in the new neighborhood policies after the Arab Spring. This is very interesting and promising, of course, because normally instrumental views about regionalization cause problems and fractures, of course. By the way, we are not the only actors of borders, because bordering in itself is created also by hegemonic practices outside Europe. And if we think of this kind of instrumental risk in having this kind of policies, we cannot forget that elite in many countries create spaces of exclusion. And it's not the case that sometimes they adopt European styles in managing cities, for example, or managing economies, while continuing to putting a kind of Mediterranean brand. And I think that these are two models of the same reality. What kind of reality? A reality that, of course, can cause problems at the level of normal society, because it's a kind of approach that the kind of approach that don't provide fertility or well-being and interesting conditions for people. So it becomes also a room for proselytism, a room for not well-being, a room for fractures. So this is a kind of approach that sometimes we call the deterritorialization or dispossession, when we are ruining a little bit some thick relationships in place. And so people rest without identity, and we have to look for another identity. Identity is a problematic concept, as we know. What are other kind of borders, of course? As we know, there is also a rising approach in terms of Islamophobia and clash of civilizations. It is a kind of continuation also of old intellectual traps, like, for instance, Géographie de la fracture. We move generally from an approach which points out at the Mediterranean as a unitary space, and then we go to another approach, and the Mediterranean becomes a place of discontinuities and fractures. This, of course, causes problems, I mean, because there are two polarized visions, but what is in between, it is normally lost. I don't refer now to concept of Islamophobia, or for some scholars, when do they come from? But of course, we can afford later on. I'm just trying to do hard to reduce my presentation. Basically, if we think there are some intellectual traps, there are some policy traps, I mean, the way in which we are territorializing relationships, Europe, Southern and Eastern Mediterranean, if we have some internal path of development creating some problems, we can probably think that Mediterranean is just a bordered, a problematic region, and which is not really. But of course, part of our talk and discussions is about what is a critical reflexive approach about powers confrontations and the issue of inhospitability in the Mediterranean. So Of course, we don't think that Mediterranean is a kind of liquid continent of pain. This was just an example of how European policies could create some volatility in relationships and sometimes compromises. But why I refer to this? Just because we don't live anymore in a kind of high codified knowledge or high society. Now the mass are really exposed to all kinds of telecommunications and information. So the political boundary of our communities are much more delicate and interesting than there was in the past. So this should be really taken into account. Another frontier of borders, of course, and bordering and creating problems is, of course, mobility. Issues of ethnicity, not acceptance of the others, which is not for Europeans only, because it's an issue covering all kinds of areas along the Mediterranean. But it's true that this kind of approach normally are building a Mediterranean which is an institutionalized space, an institutionalized space of security and geostrategic significance. But this is probably something conflicting with other ideas of, I don't know, commerce, as Enric explained before, about science and about everyday people, their potential, possibilities to do things together, all kinds of new things happening in countries outside Europe. So sure, it is something that needs some position on this kind of issues. These were images I took in Lampedusa. Because this kind of bordering attitudes about the Mediterranean, of course, and the challenges put to the European society in terms, for instance, of detention camps where identity should be detected and people can be stayed there for 1 year and even longer, is also another ongoing territorialization about the Mediterranean, which impact on cooperation among shores and which impact among relationships between normal, ordinary citizens from whichever countries they do come from. So possibly there can be another regionalization process if we take this approach, in the sense that the Mediterranean is a border, and is border of camps and detention centers. And the idea of camps is, in any case, it's an interesting idea, because also if we carry out analysis in the refugees camps outside Europe, of course, we can understand the concrete geopolitical significance of these, because they are not simply a space for international agencies, but they are really a space with all kinds of voices and powers and flows and ideas go there, elaborate, and come from. I would like to refer here to another last narrative, creating borders. Of course, I think my assumption is that we don't like so much borders, if we need margins, of course, but maybe I'm wrong. Another narrative complicating situation is a narrative as a regime of truth. Is the position which is not dominant, but is a popular view, for instance, in Germany, against the so-called pigs. I mean, a kind of rhetoric the politicians use in many countries, telling that about Southern European countries and their vices, because they want to spend more than they earn. This is simply told like this, but it's, of course, it's a kind of trap for Europeans, and is also a trap for citizens, and creates itself borders, and it weakens Europe, of course, because it is misleading, because it doesn't really read all the causes for these. So these are the borders. Why the borders are important? Because if we look at our mirror and we look at south or we look east, we can see a lot of these images. What I want to refer with these images, they are very poor settlements, but they have antennas. They are exposed to the world, but they are exposed to information. They are exposed also to geopolitical competition, for instance, in the role of digital TV like Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya. So it's an incredible arena where normal people absorb a lot of thoughts, ideas, narratives again. And the interesting fact is that these kind of digital antennas or digital contents are also in Europe. So this is a kind of situation which complicates the idea of borders, of course, because we are mixed, as we try to explain later on. If I can count on Riccardo telling me at a certain time, then I have to finish, please. So what is my idea of Mediterranean? Not really thinking that is a bridge of cultures. Can we see at the Mediterranean as chorus? Chorus was an ancient concept by Plato, and it means a place where somebody chooses to set his or her home. So put in other ways, my questions are, do you feel at home in Mediterranean? Are you feel obliged to leave your home in the Mediterranean? Are you under bombings in the Mediterranean? And so on and so on. I think the idea of Cora, living together, is a kind of, let us understand a little bit something, because on the other side, what is the opposite of Cora? We call it, for instance, urbicides, the killing the city. Killing the cities kills the heritage, the stratification of métissage, the stratification of mixed ethnicities and identities in cities. And not having chorus, it means diversity side. I kill what is different from me. And this causes, again, a mass of mobile people and instability and inequality. So let us leave this kind of dark picture, because we are not really interested to dark pictures, of course, and Mediterranean is just beautiful. Releasing the Mediterranean from imprisonment. I think that looking at Mediterranean not just as a space, but and going along the idea of permanencies is useful to have a kind of account of countless circulations in Mediterranean and a permanent dialectics between spatial fixities and mobilities. Indeed, Mediterranean is full of crossing and encounters. We are not really interested in problems of regionalization in itself, because boundaries, as Predrag Matjevich says, there is no way of drawing them. And the idea of métissage is also an interesting idea. Unfortunately, it is disappearing, but it is an interesting idea about the Mediterranean alternative. So, another, maybe I would like to quote just this additional point for releasing Mediterranean from imprisonment, that normally the tradition is to characterize Mediterranean as an iconographic space. We assign symbols, we assign ideas, we assign stereotypes, before having understood really the proper nature of Mediterranean. And this we have a responsibility also as a Mediterranean scholars, of course. So this iconographic approach, iconographic characterization, what does it imply for Mediterranean? A Mediterranean with really no perspective or without appreciation of change. So we need to understand what are the change. I won't refer now to what our colleagues from other shows think about the Mediterranean in detail, but they seem very aware about the diversity and the richness of the different parts of the Mediterranean, and Europe is part of the Mediterranean, more than maybe we think from Europe about the Mediterranean. Obviously, they think that Europe should invest more, like Japan, for instance, does in the Asia-Pacific. So why not Europe normally is a bit shy regarding Mediterranean? So some of them think that this can be an opportunity for better integration. What is of specific interest for me, among all the others, is not really the fact that they are very aware about the reasons why societies are in search of identity, and the major sickness is identity. What is very interesting is that traditionally, compared to what we think we elaborated in terms of policies and ideas, there is no real Mediterranean for them, because it's still very strong. The identity path built by the Arab-Muslim path, which gave a priority to the Arab identity based on religion and common language. So sometimes Mediterranean seems just a border for coming to Europe. So what I would like to refer now is about the idea of mobility. Mediterranean as a global mobile reality. Why? Because there are new phenomena which are not simply the bordering, they are also cross-bordering. Sometimes they are intertwining shores. And I think for understanding this, we should refer more to everyday practices and citizens' practices more than high cultures or more than political approaches. And I think the paradigm is precisely that one of mobilities when we have a thick concept of mobility, spatial and virtual. So there is a complex and interesting geography of interconnections which give fresh ideas. The hypothesis that I'm investigating is the internet serves as a factor of integration for dark and for good, but is a factor of integration. And this partially reverses the idea of fragmentation and the supposed clashes of civilizations. If we study, for instance, all kinds of virtual interconnections in terms of diaspora, in terms of migrants, I study some connections in terms of militants, movement, and activities in virtual spaces and spatially. We indeed discover a kind of new world. It is not a war, it is not an image covering all the aspects, of course, but it is also a sign of interesting path of regionalization that in terms of activism mobilize, for instance, new rising class in terms of more young people and urban ones. But in terms of migrants, mobilize also normal people. And is not really the point of the transnational type of migrants, because indeed migrants shape their residential geographies, and migrants are in Europe. But I will explain later, it's not true that mobility comes from south to north. There are all interesting new phenomena, for instance, in Morocco or in other countries that they challenge this idea. I won't go too much in details of this kind of analysis, but I would like just to stress the fact that in many cases, this kind of interactions in virtual environment, they became interactions also in spatial environment, because activists, for instance, visited each other. They think together how to propose new ideas, to organize demonstrations, to propose new ideas about this kind of common space. A common space which sometimes look more common that compared to other space, but not only. There are a lot of interesting regionalization process. I call them like this. Even maybe I'm a bit more exaggerating, because activists from Arab countries and to Middle East, they cooperate each other. They read each other, they make solidarity to each other, they share information, they challenge taboos. they change the status quo. So this is a kind of interesting regionalization path, cross-bordering, intertwining, but it is not limited to to South and East Mediterranean. It's really melded also in the European space with the Italian activists, the British one, Spanish one. I'm speaking about good things, of course. Because, so there are many ideas of not really bridging, because bridge, I think, is an old idea. Bridge is just two-way relationships, and it is a narrow street. The metaphor of networks, maybe even more than networks, is always maybe more interesting. So from this approach, we can look at the Mediterranean as a space in pursuit of dignity, and it is a young people regionalization construct. Of course, there can be hegemonic counter-narrative, like, for instance, digital TV, as I said. And as a matter of fact, for instance, I think normally we separate North Africa from Middle East, and we think Middle East is a separate identity. I prefer probably the French notion of Proche-Orient, because in the contemporary geography, it's more interesting to think to some countries like Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, etc., like Near East. Because indeed, the Middle East now is the Gulf, is Saudi Arabia, the Qatar, and they have a lot of influences and crossing and exchanges in Europe and in North Africa and the Middle East as well. So what can be other kind of mobilities that they can guide us a little bit in new explorations of the Mediterranean? That there are many Europeans are emigrating to the south. You know about Spanish people that they are migrating to Morocco to look for a job. There are a lot of people that they think that in some countries like Morocco is a better place to start up an enterprise. There are flows of retired people that they go there, not just like the Swedish when they go to the Costa Brava, but also elderly that they cannot have the proper care in Europe because privatization costs too much. So, for instance, some French people put their elderly in Morocco with the special private care there. So there are a lot of mobilities, professional, but also normal people. And there are reversing trends, people as the impact of crisis, of course. Interesting trends about women mobilities, that they challenge the paradigm of push and pull migration theory. But above all, I think this kind of mobilities in light of the internet age really challenge the idea of borders and the idea of separations, because they provide effects on all shores, I mean. One interesting example, for instance, is the return and migration. I think should be an interesting topic also can be an interesting topic because, for instance, when people have to come back to Northern Africa, return migration is an opportunity also for Europe. Why? Because in many cases, they come back to their countries about a very good idea of Europe, and this is good for the local societies. There is not only the bad idea of Europe. And they also come back and they have problems in reintegration there. Their children think to European schools and they think they are far better than the schools they found there. I don't want to judge, of course. I would like just to say that it is an opportunity for better bridging, for instance, Maghreb, Europe, because they have also nostalgia of Europe and they are driver of change because they put challenge to their government in some regards, like schools, housing. They are also creating enterprises, so they can be active players of changing. So that's, I point out that, for instance, Moroccan case is very interesting to be studied. So what I would like to propose, just as a short summary, is I try to develop discussions about how Mediterranean has been imprisoned, how maybe we can deborder and detense a little bit the situation, at least from the point of view of studies and science, and really that Mediterranean is on the move. It's a very interesting reality, and Mediterranean is a part of Europe. Mare Nostrum for Europe is the same Mare Nostrum for other countries, even more than the Baltic on other seas, but I am Mediterranean, so you can think that I am not really the most objective person, but I think Mediterranean is a world region, and it is perfectly inserted in a global situation. In such complicated and interesting geographies of interconnections between money, power, weapons, ideas, that is really an incredible field to be investigated, at least because we are scholars and we need to think just in terms of scholars. And I fully agree that with Enric, first of all, that I don't like to dispute either, that science can do a good job and also an interesting one. Thank you.
Okay, Parvati. Okay, thank you. First of all, just to remind you that it will be a reception after the ending of the discussion, so you will be very welcomed in the outside to drink and to chat in other. That continuation, this is the Disputatio, but we start a new experience, and tomorrow the whole day will be devoted to different points of the Mediterranean, geologically, biologically, cultural, migration, etc. It was an academic meeting that it will be from 9:30 to 6 p.m. in the Institute of Catalan Studies. And after, as Professor Banda mentioned, it will be a bus to go to Cosmo Cascia, which is far away, but is worthy the visit, where the Mediterranean exhibition, one of the best I have ever seen, is there. And besides the exhibition, it will be a choral concert made by an important choral from Castelldefels, which is with singing the medieval songs, mostly the Llibre Vermell de Montserrat, but all these things about the Mediterranean. So I sing some Catalan song to farewell all of you. So I would like that you join us to this. Okay, so we receive a set of questions, and it's very curious that most of them are coincidence in the two points of view, so the north or the south. We could say, I don't know, we could say western and eastern from the Professor Banda showed us the western and the eastern, even the currents. But now, all of you, all the questions are worried about the north and the south. It's a real coincidence with different points. I don't mention the author of the question, but it's written the email, and some of them I will give them to the speakers, and perhaps, or I will help them, and they will answer you personally if you are not satisfied with the answer. So the first question, by order, this is very important. This is an European view. Both of you are Spanish, you're Italian, and this is the view. And what about the South? Which is bring here an answer to me or to the speakers, because you are biased. Enric, or?
Well, I think Maria is more
Men first.
competent than I am in answering this question, but I can give you an answer. I can give you an answer from scientific point of view. The disadvantage of the north-south relationship in the world of science is the difference in attention to science in the north and in the south. And then the relationship becomes perverted because you're the rich and the other ones are the poor, and this is the worst situation that can happen. And this is why the efforts by the European Union or the European Commission in the framework program to link north and south shores of the Mediterranean, I find it a good idea. Otherwise, the governments in northern Africa and in the south shore of the Mediterranean becomes very difficult.
I can reply to this question, put another question. Why do you think North and South? Because we need to consider also East and West, of course. And we discarded a little bit some big players like Turkey, for example, or other realities. And so I try to go beyond this kind of fracture north-south, pointing out to networks which are on place. Because, for instance, if we look at all kinds of networks and discourses, we understand that they are going beyond the geographical division north-south, east and west. And also, what are the origin point of this kind of dialogues and encounters? We cannot say they are really in Europe, or we cannot say they are really in the South, because now we live sometimes at the intersection of a more complex environment like it is cyberspace. And what about the South? So that's why I'll try to go a little bit beyond this kind of vision bordered, because the situation is much more intertwined. And my short discussions about the instrumentalization of European policies regarding Mediterranean was precisely like this, that we need maybe to put more and to work more on everyday practices and people narratives. And I think at least for us as European can be a good entry point. Another job should be done also by colleagues from other shores, I think.
Thank you. Now it's also an interesting question, because just Enric and Professor Banda told about we are, I agree, everybody agree, we are more developed the north than the south. But this is, scientists must consider the past and the future. The question will be in the future, because in the 5th century of our era, 6th century, until at least the 8th century, we were poor in the north, and they were rich in all music, all literature, all the classical works entered through Spain, through the Iberian Peninsula, thanks to the Islamic. So they were richer and more, and they ate much better than we ate, because we don't have potatoes, we were starving, I mean, Europeans. Well, this is the past, we have the present, and with the future. The future is, you think it will be a kind of agreement, and perhaps science will resolve, the hard sciences will resolve this, soft sciences will resolve the other, or the present situation of absolute irrationality will stay, because we have something near the chaos, or the social chaos. So it will be for the better, or it will be impossible solution to this, which is the future.
Well, I wish I knew. No, what I can say is nothing stays forever. You know, you yourself have mentioned when the the rich part was the south, and I think this will change. But we don't have enough knowledge to really. I mean, this is not exact sciences that you can predict what will happen when you throw a satellite or a special thing to a comet which is 500 million kilometers away, and you hit it and you orbitate and so on. So I mean, I think it's pure speculation. But what it is for sure is that things do not stay as they are. If you look at borders, you've been talking about borders. We have a politician in this country that once said that borders are what they are, well, borders are what they are until somebody else comes and changes the borders, you see. So, sorry, it's not a very, educated answer, but that's what I have to say.
Yes, I fully agree that the idea of walls doesn't work out so well. Of course, we need some attention, but we are so mixed. We think that we are European, but we are so mixed. Also, in the European context, we have so many communities having different attitudes that we are already mixed. So, the contact zone is here, is already there. So we have just to work to understand what are the merges for a good living together, and what are new ideas about living together. It's just not a matter of a border, because we are really already confronting about the future. I think Mediterranean, compared to other zones, can be. Don't forget that there is a lot of money also in Mediterranean. How money is invested and is channeled is another matter. I mean, all the oil revenues are in Europe, and they are creating something new. And I think the game, but also the other society, are playing a great game, I think, with the new voices asking for dignity, challenging taboos. There are some governors that they are doing their best to open their societies. There are new alliances. Of course, I agree with Eric, I cannot say more than this.
One thing perhaps that maybe Maria agrees as well, is that if you have the perspective of several centuries, the world has improved. And therefore we have to think that this tendency will continue. So the future, I look at the future with optimism.
Okay, now it's a question coming not from in engineering, I think from a professor of logic, and it's very practical. What is the present state and prospect for scientific and technological collaboration between researchers from Europe, from the north and from the south? Really, you both belong and are very active in Europe, in Brussels, and all the money that means it. And you can, and I remember you mentioned the RRI. What do you think it will be the near future about the real, not all words but facts? How can we, or they would like to, the South, would like to collaborate with us? What's your position?
To be very pragmatic, I think it depends on resources. I mean, one has to think that in science, when we collaborate, when scientists collaborate, what you look for when you're a scientist and you're trying to solve a problem, you look for talent. You look for somebody who will collaborate with you to progress in your research. We don't look at passports. I mean, scientists never look at passports. It doesn't matter the passport. We don't look at it. But for this to happen, which now happens in Europe in a very natural way, for this to happen, there has to be the playing field has to be leveled. And if there are resources that can be used in the south, coming from wherever, it doesn't matter, Brussels or Washington or Sydney, it doesn't matter, I think it will be very easy, because these countries that are in developing, they are so eager to collaborate that they make your life very easy when you want to collaborate. But this difference in resources is what is one of the main obstacles, in my opinion.
Are you asking about technological cooperation, something like that? Science and innovation?
You have
no, I have just a
group, etc. What are your connections with the South?
Okay, I just thinking to pragmatically, what do we know about the new Euro-Mediterranean University in Fez, how we can develop ties with them, for example. because this can be a good venue for cooperation and dialogue. This is one hub. There can be other hub in the Middle East, of course. Just this.
I must mention not just the collaboration in one thing, for instance. One of the attendants here is in constant contact with the Institut Pasteur in Tunisia, in Tunis. That is nothing to do, only the name, but not depends on the French. So the collaboration is possible, and specifically, and important. I think this is a good example that how we must collaborate with centers and interactions, etc., etc. And this is okay. The next one is somebody who congratulate you for the mirror metaphor. Okay. And always the same. We return to the first question. Do you think the view from the other side of the mirror, both of you, is more or less the same, or they have the other side of the mirror are completely different?
Yeah. It depends. It depends, because in some cases we can share same approach. If we think in terms of dignity, in terms of a good life, a good job, less corruption, etc. And many of the migrants, for instance, I interviewed in 2011 in Tunisia, and were young people having job qualifications, and they look at Europe as a space of opportunity, and they say, in Europe, if we work hard and if we have our certificate, we can have better conditions. So sometimes views are more positive than we think. And so it depends on what is your interlocutor. Of course, we are dealing about opportunities and openness, and we are also dealing with blockages. So sorry, I cannot give just one
No,
answer.
I would only say what I have said before. When you look at the cooperation, international cooperation with countries from the other side of the south shore of the Mediterranean, one of the things that you always detect is this eagerness to learn, which is much more than what we have when we go abroad. And we already have a lot of eagerness, but these people, I mean, they really die to get the level that they think they deserve. And that, as I have said before, makes that life easier. I mean, I don't know there's anybody from France here, but the French harvest of North African talent is very high. Is very high and very productive.
Thank you. Well, just I put together there are three more, but I will jump with them together, because it's more or less even one person answered and put two questions, two sheets here. Okay, so this is perhaps one of the speakers show us about the origin, be comfortable. They dry 5.5 million years ago. So they were not humans, they were primates in Africa, but for sure they were not our species. So it was one thing happened 7,000 years ago, you know, in the now called Black Sea was a lake. After the glaciation, there was big rivers even there, and it was a lake, fresh water. I have seen one core in which the snails is in Hui in the States, and the bottom snails are fresh water.
Yeah.
And after change, the upper, the present one, are salty water. So in the Bosphorus, means I bring oxygen. So the water enter, and it increased at least not so quick as Professor Banda, but it increased at about 90 meters. So now it's higher, and so many of the civilizations escaped, and this was 7,000 years ago, so it's in our memory. It was the time in which we were farmers and took animals. So things are changing from the point of view of science. But more or less, one aspect was the Mediterranean is a border. But you mentioned the two possibilities, but it's also crossing point.
More than crossing point, yes.
What is the thing? It seems to me that this person, there is a contact point of view. How do you see this?
That we need mergers, even not borders, because in any case, identity needs to have a kind of borders. Otherwise, we don't have distinctive identities. But it's more than border, is the concept of frontier and the concept of networks, which is blurring our context. So indeed, we live in a kind of geographical dimension which is quite new, because I think that, for instance, the wireless mobile communications is a kind of a novel spatio-temporal dimension for us, that it creates also empathy, solidarity. So I really cannot think so much in terms of strict borders, or from the opposite view in terms of encounters, because we have a kind of multi-presence, we have a kind of multi-exposures, so we are just, talking about something which is new compared to the old Mediterranean, I think.
Yeah, I will have to leave you on. Sorry about the drink, but let me answer. Let me just. A tectonic border is a tectonic border, nothing to do with humans. And actually, for scientists, as I have said before, we don't look at passports, so borders are invisible to scientists. I'm sorry, I have to.
Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. We know this. Well, this is the end. Thank you to the two speakers. And I must say that this was very clear that it was the position of the physical state, our picture. It was Professor Banda, and our behavior. It was Professor Paradiso. And also the speakers were an important, the questions were very important. So we have this problem, perhaps we must invite some people from the south to see the other things. But then I could say that we can be optimistic about the future. It's everything, all predictions are very difficult, especially those referring to the future. But the future is in our hands. We must put our collaboration, everything we can, and we hope that the other side of the mirror will come with us, or we go with them, because in the right way and from democracy. So we hope that the Mediterranean will be a mare nostrum again, but mean nostrum not only from the Italians, but also for all the Europeans. Thank you very much.
Can I just say that our event is not yet fully closed, but thank you very much, Dr. Guerrero, for those very wise and thoughtful words. But we still have a couple of more words to hear, so may I please invite Mr. Dehaene to say a few words first, and then the conseiller Mascolei will very kindly close this Disputatio.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I thought the story of the snail put an interesting twist on the meaning of the word mare nostrum, freshwater and saltwater snail. I mean, who does it belong to? It depends, and that takes me to the borders that you talked about. The interesting thing, I think, I've had a classical education, so I got to know the Mediterranean also as a mare nostrum. But of course the question is, who does the nostrum refer to? And over 2 or 3 or 4 or 7,000 years, it can go from snails to refugees, from Greeks to Phoenicians, to Aragonese empires and Spanish empires, to the La Serenissima, to the British fleet, or to the American fleet stationed in Naples. Just so it all depends. I think one of the interesting questions is to see this as a nodal point, not just for all the things you talked about, but for dominance or domination. along with a number of other crucibles in the world, most of which are archipelagos and interior seas, like the Caribbean at a given moment, and some would argue the South China Sea for the present and for the near future. And the Mediterranean is one of these places where history happens and keeps happening. That's one thing. My other task is simply to, on behalf of the Academia Europaea, I think, thank the organizers, both the state of Catalonia and the city of Barcelona, but also the United Nations University and Professor Guerrero and his collaborators. And as editor of the European Review, I would like to ask you and Ricard Banda in absentia whether you would consider writing this up in a 4,000 to 5,000 word article, submitting it to the European Review, so that not only the people present here, but also all members of the Academia Europaea and all readers of the European Review can take cognizance of your interesting views. Thank you. Now I give the word to...
Which is the deadline?
Excuse me?
The deadline for the papers. This is it.
Yeah, well... I mean,
you are the editor.
yes, that's why I'm also inviting them. And I think I now give the word to Professor Collel.
Very briefly, the reception is waiting. Friends, just three pieces of thank yous. First, I would like to thank the audience. It occurred to me that around here we could measure if people have the right stuff according to if they keep their attending commitments even if it rains. So thank you for being here. The second is I want to recognize this wonderful cooperation between the UNU, the Institute of the University of the United Nations University, and the Academia Europaea, the Barcelona hub. I think it's just wonderful that these institutions cooperate and cooperate in a topic like the Mediterranean. And third, of course, to the speakers, that I think they have convinced us, if we didn't know it, that the Mediterranean was very complicated 6 million years ago, and it's very complicated today. That it can be, its understanding can be illuminated by the collaboration and the cooperation of the physical science, of the social sciences, of the humanities. When you were talking about your humanities background, I thought that for some youngsters here, the Mare Nostrum is the name of a supercomputer. Thank you very much.
Why not? Why not?
The supercomputer here is
That's new to me.
We have the reception over there.